Hi, my name is Scott Sterner, and I'm the grandfather, or supposedly the grandfather, of the Oyster Festival.
Hi, I'm Kyle Sterner, Scott's son and heir to the oyster throne.
Yeah. We operate North Bay Shellfish. We started the business probably in 1982, more or less. Um, we were working for an oyster, another company prior to that here in Humboldt Bay, and they went out of business, and we needed some work. So we figured we'd give it a try and to do it on our own, and we've slowly been trying to figure it all out and stay alive, and we're still alive, and now Kyle's doing the same. Long ago, we had some friends that were part of the Arcata downtown group, and they were trying to come up with an idea to generate funds to support all of the wonderful things they do for the community and such. And so one of them had this crazy idea that maybe they could do an oyster festival. And so since we were friends and I knew a little bit more about oysters than they did at the time, other than they knew they liked oysters, they invited me to the meeting and asked me questions like when's a good time, and and what it's all about. And so I gave them as much knowledge as I had at the time of when might be a good time and that sort of stuff, and they took it from there and started an amazing thing that has continued through the years and grown to unbelievable magnitudes that we would have never guessed at that point. Well,
They call you the grandfather of
yeah, the Oyster Man, or I have a lot of other nicknames too that probably aren't printable, but people sort of relate. Since I'm now the Oldtimer, I used to be the new guy. Now I'm the old guy. Associate me with the Oyster Festival and the shirt. Supposedly we did a lot of promotions for the first few oyster festivals, and this was taken from a photograph out on the site of me pulling some long lines, and an artist transformed it into their first shirts, and then they use it every now and then. Still, it continues to be part of their hoopla.
Well, I've been, kind of, at a young age coming out to the farm and just kind of hanging out with my dad. And, over the past 10 years, I've realized, it's something that I want to keep around and keep in my family. And so, kind of following in his footsteps of taking over the business. But, it's been part of me in my life for, almost 30 years now. So, yeah, I love it out there, and I'm really starting to appreciate, all the values you learn with oyster farming. And, people say we look alike, but now we're, real mirror images. He was, in his mid-20s when he first started, and so that's when I would say I've really taken oyster farming seriously. So, it's nice to, not, watch it, escape our family. So I look forward to many more years of oyster farming and having him still, part of the business. And, it's what he loves to do. So the hard work makes our oysters unique for sure.
Well, I think also the growing area, ours is, we lease our land from the city of Arcata, so we're way back up at the north end of Humboldt Bay. So, and we're close to, Arcata. And so we don't have the influence like a lot of the closer beds to the mouth of the bay. Ours is more influenced by that section of the bay, because the dynamics is different. I think the foods are probably a little bit different. Plus, we have kind of a unique system too, that we grow them in the North Bay, but we also move them then into Mad River Slough, where we have a wet storage. And so we're able to hang our product there and keep them alive there. And Mad River Slough is just a crazy, unique ecosystem. It's so different than the main part of the bay. And it also allows us to hold our product right in the water and then get it to the restaurants or the farmers markets or something with relatively very little time. So, I mean, a lot of times the oysters have only been out of the water maybe a couple of hours before they're delivered to the restaurants, which is pretty phenomenal these days to have that fresh a product available. And I think the other unique thing is we grow a fairly high intertidal, and so the oysters really strengthen their abductor muscle and form a really hard shell, and so which enables them to last for a long period of time out of the water because they have such a strong abductor muscle. And Kyle's learned how to give them all that loving care that nurture them, because you see them from the time we get them to the time we sell them. You get to recognize the same oyster over and over again as it grows up.
Do you ever name any of your oysters?
We're tempted to, but you know, it's one of those things we have to part with it. You know, we have graduation, so we have to send them off.
Sometimes I sort of throw them off into a separate bag and kind of have, you know, some brute stock is what you would, you know, call them. Like, I've always kind of just like certain shapes, you know, whether they be flat oysters for grilling or, you know, deep cups for doing raw. So I've just kind of enjoyed a lot of the variety that we kind of grow, and, you know, just kind of isolating different phenotypes. And
well, you've learned also the densities to load things at, and make sure that the oysters that are coming out are nice shaped and fat and juicy and fresh.
The ideal oyster, you know, I like them a little bit smaller. I like to sell them as, you know, kind of more of a Kumamoto size, even though they are Pacifics. I've sorted every one of them with, you know, these two hands.
I started the business, I think, around 1982, but it's definitely has changed and grown. I mean, we initially raised our oysters using long lines, and we took larvae that we bought from a hatchery and set it on shell, sort of as like what Coast still does on their long lines. We did that for a number of years, but we were basically, when we started, was sort of the beginning of single seed and the events of oyster hatcheries, and it's crazy to see how the industry has transformed and progressed and modernized, and I mean, just what they're doing. I mean, the flupsies and how they grow seed and the capabilities of production at the hatcheries and how the industry has changed. I mean, look at how Coast has evolved too. It's been pretty impressive of all the changes that they've gone through, and how it's great to see also that the environment has, because of the improvement of techniques and paying attention to the environment, how the whole health of the bay has really gotten better since the time that I've started, and it's just kind of a neat thing to see because it's such a unique job and environment that we work in. I think one of the interesting things too for the industry is that when we work in relationship to tides a lot, and we're outside in weather, and so being outside, that connection with that part of the world is something that a lot of people lose touch with. So we know the lunar cycles, we know when low tide is and high tide is during the day, we know whether the storm front's coming in and how much it's going to rain. I mean, we pay attention to all that, you know. It's different than the person that works in a building or something, plus all the crazy things that we've seen by being outside. Weather can get a little bit nasty when it's blowing hard, or it's super cold out there and you can't feel your fingers or your toes, or, you know, I mean, but that just makes you appreciate the rest of it, and it makes you stronger.
Thickens your skin.
Yeah. For the Oyster Fest, well, we had a booth initially for the first 15 years. As the Oyster Fest grew and got bigger and popular, we were there mostly to promote and encourage people to come out and try the oysters, and we probably gave away as many as we sold back in those days. And then once Grace, my wife, and I, as our kids got older and got close to graduation, I think it was Whitney, who's a few years older than Kyle. When she was graduating from high school, my wife said, okay, you stop doing the Oyster Festival because you got to be at the graduation. So that was my last year of doing the Oyster Festival. That's why we stopped. Although Kyle just recently
Last year,
started back up again. So we're finally back at it again, and doing it. And Kyle has his own twist on it all, and it's pretty crazy to be there again. But it feels good. But we've been involved every year, trying to help some of the other growers, or helping set up. Todd, which will be here with Humboldt Bay Oyster Company, he's a grower that had supplies a lot of the restaurants, because being a small grower like this, everybody sort of outgrew our capabilities of supplying, because they want like 10,000 oysters for the Oyster Festival or something crazy like that. And to try to produce that kind of numbers for one particular day is pretty difficult for a small operation. Plus, there's only so much we can do, and plus we were also trying to hang on to our regular accounts and do what we usually do, which was usually enough for us.
The restaurants tend to, order more oysters during that week too.
Yeah, it's amazing how many oysters they go through at the Oyster Festival.
Yeah. I started helping my dad at the Oyster Fest at, again, a very young age, just kind of, helping open a few oysters here and there. And, I never really realized that it was, such a, huge moneymaker and, stimulus for the economy of, not only Arcata, but all of Humboldt County. And just how cool it's, really transitioned over the years, watching it from such a young age blossom into what it is now. It's nice to really kind of, step back into that and, have that history, I think Oyster Fest, one of the first Oyster Fest was, my dad promoting it, and he was holding me as a kid still barbecuing oysters with my mom in front of the Arcata Co-op, and seeing those articles really, inspired me to, kind of take off and, start my own thing there. And, it's definitely, it's a really socially, fun and exciting, thing to be a part of, and something that I feel deeply connected to, and it's nice to, have my dad actually not be working and kind of, just attending the event for once, and kind of passing down the torch, if you will, for Oyster Fest for me. Last year was my first year that I started, and it was a mild success. About 3,000 oysters we sold, which is pretty. It's about 1,000 oysters a grill, and I had a lot of first timers and people who were just learning how to shuck an oyster. So I'm trying to get it more dialed down, and I really spend a lot of time in putting a nice sauce on something that I've spent so long growing, and just kind of the symbiotic relationship with the flavors and working with the quality of the oyster. I starts there, so I'm perfecting it, and I hope to expand year after year, even with all this. I'm really excited to do both aspects of oyster farming, the selling of the oyster and growing it as well. So it helps to be able to cook it in order to sell it as well.
There's been a few. There's every day is a memorable event. Just the connection with what you see out there, whether it's like
watching,
bat rays skimming across the surface, or huge groups of leopard sharks swirling, or peregrine falcons diving on this or that. I've seen, even back in originally there was a pair of pink flamingos that were escaped, and they actually, I saw them on Sand Island, early in the morning. You're like, am I really seeing, that or not? But yes, and I've had a seal try to climb in my boat, to just check it out while I've been out there. Just crazy things like that is stuff And then my wife was saying, I should mention that we've also helped out on and coasted too the whole oyster industry in our one and only oil spill that we had in Humboldt Bay, which was huge and gave us a heads up as far as what could happen and what could happen to the oyster industry. I mean, something like that could really devastate all of us because if any oil gets on our product, it becomes hazardous waste basically, and everything has to be removed from the bay. So an oyster spill in Humboldt Bay could be hugely devastating, and luckily we were able to prevent the oil that did escape during that time from entering up into North Bay where the oysters were. But that was it was a crazy time out there trying to prevent the oil moving up into the bay. And then the other one that Kyle and I were talking about is prior, since I've been doing it for so long, GPS wasn't around for a long time, and I used to run a lot of evening, nighttime tides, and the fog gets pretty thick out there, and I've been lost in the fog trying to make my way back numerous times, and the one especially time I remember was back when Coast had a dredge anchored out in the bay when they were doing bottom culture, and I was trying to make my way back. I saw the dredge out in the middle of the bay, so I sort of tied up to it for a little while, waiting for the tide to come up, because unless you can find the channels, it's hard to navigate out in the bay. And when the tide was high enough, I let go and thought I would, if I drove in a straight direction, I'd make it to hit some shoreline that it would look recognizable at some point. And 20 minutes later, after I left the dredge, all of a sudden the dredge appeared in front of me again, and I wound up realizing I had done nothing but done a complete circle in the bay without never hitting the shore, and which was a little frustrating since by that time it was probably like 2 or 3 in the morning and wanting to get home and being cold and tired and stuff. But luckily my second attempt I was able to find the shore and made my way home, and Grace was a little worried, but because that was before cell phones and all that too. And I had a great blue heron join me for a little bit of the time out there. He landed on the front of the boat and we hung out together. So I had a little bit of entertainment. So that was probably a good, memorable moment. For us, for the first 15 years, I mean, it was crazy that all our friends sort of joined us to come help us with the thing, and it was almost like we had this little party on the Arcata Plaza, and friends would come visit, and we'd just be out there barbecuing oysters and having a good time, and plus seeing it all grow. It was great. The community is great, and just having people come, and it was such a positive thing of seeing people actually enjoy something that you're working hard to produce. And the enjoyment, I would have never believed it, because until I started farming oysters, I really didn't eat oysters. So to see how crazy people are about oysters and what they do and how they much enjoy it, that was the connection to the community. And having everybody there, just having the family there. And my folks used to come up, all my family members used to come up and help at the festival. It was just a whole family gathering for 15 years.